Welcome to the URM podcast. Our guest today is Doug Weier, and he's an impressive dude.
Oh yeah, Doug kills it. He's got 23 number ones. He's one of the top ACC mixers on the planet right now.
It's crazy. He hasn't been at it that long.
He's just
7 or 8 years.
From what I see, just talking to him and hanging out with him, Doug just hustles hard in the dirt, and he's just a hardworking dude. So he totally crushes it.
That's kind of what I got from talking to him in this podcast. Is dude is a killer. He has his sights set on what he wants, and he goes for it no matter what. I like that. I like that.
100%.
All right, cool. Let's get into it. Here is the episode. Doug Weier, welcome to the URM podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure.
Absolutely.
So I'm curious because I've noticed a trend lately where, and I've talked about this on other podcasts too, where producers and mixers are now songwriters, whereas once upon a time that wasn't the case. And I think that there was an evolution where engineers and producers were generally two completely different people. Then it became that producers were also engineers. Then it was that producers and musicians were two completely different people. And sometimes they are, but now you have tons of artists that self-produce. And I think that another one was that producers and songwriters were often two different job categories where you hire in outside writers, and now producer, it's still done, but more and more producers are writing as part of the package. Like you go to them and they co-write with you or write for you and produce it, and basically the full menu. So that said, how do you see yourself if I was to meet you in an elevator and you were to tell me what you do?
It depends where we were. If we're in my hometown and no one does music, I would say I make music sound better. That's the deal. But here in Nashville, everyone pretty much knows what that is. So I say I'm a mix engineer.
Straight up. That's it.
That's it. Simple as that.
I love that. I love
Simple
that.
and to the point.
I love it exactly for the reasons that I was talking about. The definitions of what people do are getting so cloudy.
Yeah, totally.
I think when people specialize in the one thing, like this is what I do.
Yeah. I would say that is a good point that you had, though. I would say I wear the producer hat, 5 to 10% when I'm mixing on certain projects.
Mm-hmm.
On many of them, I'm working with super talented producers. I don't do that at all. I literally just take the audio and make it sound better. And I don't add any kind of new spin on the mix. It's just they have all the proportions and the feeling and everything right. I just make it sound like the magic is finally arrived. That type of thing.
Yeah.
But other projects, I do some pretty shady stuff. I'll reprogram bass lines, that type of stuff, make sure the low end sits super tight. I've never tracked guitars or anything crazy like that, but drum replacement, and then just anything I could do creatively with distortion, saturation, effects to if a song is lacking some kind of energy or feeling or professionalness, doing whatever it takes at all costs to make it sound like the best thing that it can possibly sound like.
Hey everybody, I want to take a quick break from this episode to talk to you about URM Academy. So if you're new here, URM Academy is the best online school for metal and rock producers and musicians. When you join, you get a whole access to a range of content. There's Nail the Mix, which I'm guessing most of you know, and that's where we bring on a different artist and a different mixer every month to walk through a mix and give you the raw multi-tracks. And we've had on mixers like Will Putney, Jens Bogren, Tom Lord Alge, with artists like Bring Me the Horizon, Meshuggah, Periphery, Opeth, even Nickelback, and tons more. If it's under the heavy music umbrella, as I like to call it, we cover it. You also get our Mixlab tutorials, which are little bite-size tutorials about very specific topics. We have over 100 of those now. So like if you don't have the time for a Nail the Mix session or an entire course, you just want to find one tidbit of info to help solve a problem, that's what Mixlabs are for. We also have exclusive members-only Facebook and Discord groups where you can make friends with and talk to thousands of people from all over the world who do the exact same thing as you. And what's super awesome about our community is that it's troll-free. We kick trolls out. It's like an oasis online. And also our instructors are part of the community and they interact with everybody. So, you can not only make friends, but you can, socialize and learn from the best. Also, we have URM Enhanced, which is our more advanced membership tier. The main focus of that is our Fast Track library, which are some very, very, very detailed courses on everything from editing drums to post-production effects, automation, creating impulse responses, working with low-tuned guitars, and more. We have over 70 of these. It's actually insane how deep and comprehensive the Fast Tracks are. And when you join Nail the Mix or URM Enhanced, you also get access to Riff Hard, our online school for metal guitarists with hundreds of lessons from artists such as Animals as Leaders, Spiritbox, Arcspire, Jason Richardson, and many more. So go to urm.academy. Let's get back into this episode. I like the whatever it takes mentality.
Yeah.
I feel like in the metal world, which is, the thing I know, it's kind of become just commonplace for mixers to do whatever's necessary because it's so unprofessional. It's so you get such garbage from people that and not always. There's a lot of great producers and engineers out there, but there's just this understanding of, the bass is probably going to come in out of tune.
Yeah.
So you could say, you didn't hire me to tune the bass. Or you could just do it. Just tune the bass or replace the bass with the synth bass or just do whatever's necessary to get that low end the way it needs to be.
I would say that's, at least I would think that's more of an old school mentality where you just get the files delivered, you do your part of the job and no more. But I think new mixers that are wanting to come up and make a name for themselves, you have to do everything you possibly can. Because if I mix a song and it comes out and it still sounds lacking, that makes me look like I suck. When maybe it was the producer lacking a little bit, but every part of the process is so important. Like the weakest link is so easy to see. So you got to make sure there's no weak links in the process. You got to cover for other people's shortcomings.
At the end of the day, even if what you were presented was just a mess, like a D-, and you did a miracle and got it to a C+ or a B-, people are going to think that you just put out a C+. They're not going to see that you took something that was being held together by dental floss and made it coherent, which is a miracle. They're not going to judge that. They're going to judge the fact that it's not as good as your best work.
Yeah. Well, and that's funny. I think you can I could probably take a D- and make it like a straight A. In my opinion, the only thing you can't fix is a bad song and a bad vocal performance. You could tune it, but I've gotten perfectly tuned stuff where the performance, you still know it's just terrible. And speaking to my sound better days 7 years ago, the stuff I'm working on now, the producers I work with are killing it. But yeah, I remember back in the day when I was first starting, it was like, how can I take this thing that sounds so bad and make me personally like it? And I would do whatever it takes, replace all the drums, do the bass replacement, tune it, time it. That's another thing. I don't think like younger guys coming up know how important pocket and timing is. That kind of is like, you can have a perfectly in tune vocal, but if it's out of pocket, it just sounds so amateur and you don't know why. So getting that stuff right is just, it's more important than the actual mix. It can sound kind of bad, but people will still perceive it as, oh, this sounds great because that vocal is locked in.
Because it feels good.
Yeah, exactly.
So, all right, can we talk about pocket some? Because I feel like that actually is one of the hardest things to explain, and
Sure.
one of the most important things to get. And how do you define it?
I would say just the groove that the singer brings to the song, whether it's, it's usually slightly behind the beat on certain notes. Just kind of swag.
I mean, that could even be like breaths, for example. Sometimes when I'm mixing, I'll cut out breaths because it's just like there's like a before the chorus starts or something, and it just totally detracts from the vibe of the song. But on some vocal flows, if you mess with the breathing, you've totally destroyed the pocket of the entire performance. So you kind of really have to gauge that, because sometimes you don't want gasps, because a lot of these producers will come in and they'll track into their CL1B too hot and they'll bring up all the breaths by 10 dB. And then, you're hitting it on your side and it's just like every breath sounds like a gasp, and you either got to, get them to the right volume, but even breathing can be a huge impact on pocket.
Yeah.
Well, because it becomes a rhythm instrument.
Yeah.
So what were you saying about you? We'll cut you
pocket
off.
is not lining things exactly up on the grid. No. I would say, it's that little nuance, the human nuance that vocalists bring when they're saying one word that's a little late, but it just feels great. That type of thing.
Yeah, I think it's the relationship in time between the instruments and the vocal, and it's kind of like where the magic is. I think when you see a live band that just kills it, typically their pocket is all they're all on the same page about where the pocket is at. And that's why their stops and their starts, it's not just that they are like a perfect quarter note on a pause or something. It's because they come in ahead or behind the beat exactly right together. And I think that the people get so obsessed with grid that they forget pocket. But then the problem becomes when you start using words like natural feel or or you hear a lot of people rag on the grid, then people will interpret that as use no grid or go way off the grid, which is also not good. So yeah. I think it's important for people to understand that the grid is there for a really good reason. And this like off the grid kind of stuff that gives it pocket is still within a framework of being in time.
Right.
You know where a good place to learn pocket is? And if you're a diehard metalhead, please put earplugs in and cover your ears for the next 5 seconds. But if you listen to disco records, because the musicianship is so insanely tight, and like it's really, really inspiring to listen to those old records and just like sit down in like a chair, like active listening, and just feel the pocket and like listen to the performances and listen to how the players play off each other and how tight they are, and realize that stuff was cut to tape. Yeah, there's editing, but editing was done with a razor blade. It wasn't gridded, but it just has a feel to it that is just like, once you kind of get into it, whether you like the genre or not, and I didn't like it for many, many years in my life. I really had to come around to it in the last few years, but I find the pocket in those performances and some of those older records to just be so inspiring to listen to. And it makes me think about modern things when they're super gridded. Like sometimes, like you said, you slide them around a little bit because you can help find a pocket in a mix. Like it totally can change a song literally like that. And it doesn't cost you anything but a little bit of time to experiment.
There's actually a way that metal players can get better at playing with pocket. already, I guess, in line with how they already work on it. So like without adding to their schedule or whatever, when they go to practice something with a metronome, whether it's scales or warm-ups or riffs or whatever, instead of just putting it on a quarter note click, or sometimes people will put it to like an eighth note click or a 16th note click, get rid of any subdivisions in the click and actually get rid of quarter notes on the 4 beats and just put a click on 2 and on 4. And if you play everything to a metronome with 2 and 4, it does this magical thing where you're focused on the backbeat, and you start to naturally understand. I don't know why it does this, but you start to naturally understand how to play around the beat and behind the beat and with pocket. It's this really interesting thing. I think it also internalizes your sense of time, where a lot of metal players will use the metronome kind of as training wheels, basically, to keep. That's why they'll put on like a 16th note click, so they don't deviate at all. But putting it just on 2 and 4, you get your mind into feeling and hearing pocket without having to do anything extra, like making yourself listen to disco for an hour a day or something.
It's worth it though.
Yeah.
One thing that's interesting about that though, so you talk about disco records, 70s and like early 80s stuff. I think because we're in the digital world now, hearing the stark differences between timing between instruments or whatever, it just sounds so much more unpleasant to the ear that you have the magnifying glass, because you don't have the forgiveness that tape has of gluing things together and kind of making it sit, and not having the crystal clear precision of separation between parts. I think I would blame that for the reason why things have got so gridded and perfect. But now we have so many amazing tools like for saturation and gluing things together that you can kind of, cloud things up a little bit in an elegant way that allows for more, pocketed playing, which I think is so cool.
Yeah, that makes sense, because you think about transient clarity in digital, it's very precise, whereas, on different formats, those transients get smeared and rounded and kind of mashed in, especially on tape, where everything is just kind of like, no one cared about transients back then because they just got deleted, they were just gone. Where now it's like everything is just so pin accurate. You can hear every little attack of every note and any instrument. So
you can hear the acoustic guitar hit differently with the kick drum, hit differently with the other percussive instruments, and it could like drive you crazy. But like gluing that in with that tape, it makes it all okay.
It's true.
It's weird though, because it doesn't change the timing. It's an interesting thing. It does have a
smearing effect though, when you say.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. But it's not like moving things in time. That's what's interesting about it.
It's interesting because it goes to show how differently you can make something feel just by changing the sonics of something. That's kind of mind blowing to me. Like I was watching this Manny Marroquin interview where he was getting started mixing, and he realized that he could change how he felt mixing this song differently. He mixed a song 2 different ways, one to feel happy and like one to feel sad, and he got a totally different result. And it's obviously the same principle, but it just shows how powerful of a job mixers have, where we can bring an emotion that wasn't present in the rough mix or production or whatever.
100%.
So you adding an emotion that you think wasn't even there inherently?
Yeah, I guess so. That coming from groove, like, for instance, like, I was working on this country song, and I hear like, everyone's all about drums, making the drums punch so hard. And the kick and snare were just like balls to the wall, but the bass was kind of like sitting underneath it, like too far. So it didn't have that bouncy groove that I wanted to hear, or that like revved up energy with just the kick, snare smashing. But when you bring up the bass, like it's literally just a level move. Bringing up the bass, you bring this groove to it that makes you want to dance rather than just sit there and like, stagnant.
Yep.
It's so true. Like yesterday, for example, I was mixing a country song for Sync, and the rough mix the producer turned in was great. And I called him. I'm like, dude, you got your vocals too loud in the chorus. And I can't believe I said that. But I'm like, if we bring them down in dB, they suddenly find this pocket with the top of the guitars. Cause he had like a really distorted, saturated kind of like hyper baked thing into the vocal where it was almost like an extension of the guitar tone. I'm like, when I bring these down, it totally changes the pocket of the chorus and it gels in a different way. And it's like, it just comes together. He's like, well, send me both versions. And I did. And he was like, oh my God, you're right. He's like, I can't believe it. He's like, oh, just that. And the whole mix would have 10% better by a dB fader move. Like just the entire way you perceive that chorus changes.
Yeah, so true. People get caught up in plugins and saturation and all these like
Parallel,
complicated things.
side
when
chain.
The simple level thing can make the biggest impact.
In the URM community, one thing that we do sometimes is this no plugin challenge, where we have people try and mix the track with no plugins and see levels and panning only.
That's crazy.
It's crazy, but it's amazing how much better some people's mixes get than when they're trying to overcook things.
Yeah, interesting.
Because I think they overlook those basics. Those I would say not basics, fundamentals. They overlook those fundamentals a lot in favor of things that are sexier.
I think it's almost like
It's like an ego thing where like when you're mixing, if you don't have a bunch of crap on a chain, sometimes you feel like you're not mixing or you're not adding anything. You're not adding your value to a song when you have to almost decommission, or I should say deprogram your mind when you're mixing to kind of basically be like, well, does it really need that? Or am I just doing that because I feel like I need to do that to justify my worth? But again, your job is to find the pocket. Your job is to bring the emotion of the song. Your job is to conduct it, like a movie where it's like you have your highs and lows and you're taking the listener on an emotional journey that they connect with. It doesn't matter if you have parallel compression on or not. It doesn't matter if you've got 8 side chains and this and that. Honestly, if you don't get the first thing, which is not sexy and not exciting, which is the balance, and you're focusing on the smaller things, like you're going to get killed out there when you're against people who are really good at that in the real world.
Yeah, I think also it's not just I have to use a lot of plugins to prove my worth. I don't think that's it a lot of the time. I think a lot of the time it's I have to use a lot of plugins because that's what I did last time.
True. Yeah.
And that's just what I do. Or that's the only thing I know how to do.
This is my chain.
Or I saw somebody say that I have to do this, so I have to do this. And not really thinking about whether or not it's appropriate.
Yeah, that's a really good point. The internet's ruined everybody for that one, thinking that you have to do something when you should just listen to the song.
Well, I'd say the internet, but I mean, I went to Berkeley before the internet became the thing we know and love now, and it was similar. There, people got you thinking you needed to do certain things just because they said you needed to do certain things. And among the students, there were students I could tell were just drinking Kool-Aid. They were convinced they had to learn or do certain things or play certain things a certain way. Just why? Because somebody else said so. And why did that person think so? Because somebody else said so. And I just think it's a human thing. So the internet just kind of added a fuel to that.
Totally.
To that human fire.
I got a good example. So, with the whole mix with the masters thing, and there's like templates other mixers templates you can use, and they say, this is how you use it. Use this every time and it will, transform your mixes. And I get producers that will, I know that they've seen this video. They're using this very intricate template and it just does not sound good to me. So I take it all off. I start from scratch, turn in a mix, and I'm like, oh my gosh, how did you do that? It's like I just took off all the BS that was caked on and didn't help anything. And
that's why we at Nail the Mix have not offered the mixers templates.
Yeah.
For that exact reason, is because you cannot copy somebody's mix template and expect it to work. That's just a fallacy and a myth. So that was a decision we made at the beginning of Nail the Mix to not include the mixers template, because it's a it's like this short-term sugar rush for the person who's subscribed, but you're not going to say you're scamming them, but you're definitely preventing them from getting better if you're giving them Manny Marroquin's mix template and making them think that that's going to get them better. They're going to be wasting their fucking time on somebody else's template as opposed to making their own. Yeah. So, like, I don't know. I feel really, really strongly about this because I've seen thousands and thousands of mixes now handed in for the Nail the Mix competition, where they have had every other Nail the Mix before it to where they could watch and like screen record and copy settings from like all of the best mixers in metal. And I know some people do that, and they do that and it doesn't help their mixes. If it was possible to copy people's mixes, I'd know by now, because we've gotten so many thousands of mixes from people, and they just, I have zero evidence to prove to me that you can copy other people's mixes. So
100% agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
make your own templates.
What's interesting about that in the professional world is if you chase, if you're doing this for a living as a mixer, if you chase somebody else's sound, you're always playing that person's game, and you will never, ever supersede them in any way, shape, or form. You always be like a crappy knockoff of that person at best. Whereas what you get hired for is the way that you hear, and like your take on the world and your sound and your instincts and the way that you interpret things. And it's like, if you focus just on developing that, and of course, you'll get inspiration like, oh, that's a really cool approach here or here. But that's what I've always liked about, things like what we do EYAL at Nail the Mix is like, some people want to go and they want to lift settings and they want to try to copy it and try to figure it out. And I understand that sugar rush, but what I care about is when I watch somebody mix, I want to see how they think, and I want to get inspired by how they think and how they approach things, and then take that inspiration and translate it into what do I do with it? And what is my prism? And does that help me evolve? And that's where I feel like the real gold is from watching other people mix, is getting into their brain, not so much what they did. Because at the end of the day, what is mixing? You're listening, you're diagnosing a problem, you're fixing that problem. And then you're like, is this better? Yes or no? And then you move on and you repeat that process.
Yeah. Instead of using templates, I would say, try working on developing your taste. Like, listen to a bunch of music, decide what you like about that music, and then go after that thing, because you're not copying that specific mixer. It's just like an example of mine. Like, I have a folder of reference mixes that I love because I love big, huge, wide, low mids that, they're not muddy, but they add such a size. And I always gravitate towards those types of mixes. Like, an example would be, there's this Beck album, forget what it's called, but it's from 2017, that Servant mix. And I mean, they're like the loudest mixes ever. They're like minus 5 LUFS, all of them. But they have this just massive size and punch and impact. And I think, deciding what you like in a song, because I have people recommend plugins all the time to me. I'll put it on and I'll be like, I don't like that. I have my own taste. And that's my biggest asset as a mixer, because that's what people come to you for. They like your taste and your decisions that you make for the mix. And that's why they come to you for this. They go to another guy for that, and you kind of create your little lane. And it's just, as soon as you find yourself in a loop of just picking up everything people tell you to do, stop and think about it. And rather than just being, a gullible internet mixer, decide what you like and go after that thing instead.
Yeah, and it's fine to study what, obviously studying what people better than you do
Oh,
is
absolutely.
a great thing. But what I specifically think should not happen is mindlessly copying it. Using it as a resource, the way you were just saying, where you work on your tastes and you understand what you're into and you develop your tastes, and then with some online education, you can use it very, very strategically to help work on techniques by people who do stuff that are kind of in line with your tastes, but not in a copying sort of way, more in just how did they do this? All right, this other person does something similar. How did they do this? All right, there's some clues right there as to how I could try to do this, and then go try to do it yourself, not by copying them, but by taking what you picked up from what they did, trying it for yourself, and then analyzing if it worked or not.
Yeah. And to me, that's the fun of mixing, is when you're working on something, you pull on a reference mix to see where am I at compared to this thing. And you hear something, it's like, man, how did they get that to happen? And like putting your mind to it and figuring that out. Just like a very specific practical example. I was listening to some Serpent mixes and I noticed this big, wide, low mid stereo field thing happening. And I was like, man, how do I get the pieces to kind of like expand out and have this space in the middle that just is such a like amazing stereo image that's happening. And I was messing with stuff, and I remember one time feeling like I completely unlocked it. It was isotope imager only on the low mids, kind of widening it out, 20%, and it just opens up this space that you didn't know was achievable. And what it kind of brought to my mixes was like, it's kind of like EQ. You're adding more content in that area. So it seems like it's adding EQ, but it doesn't add all the mud that, boosting 200 hertz would do on a mix with the EQ. The stuff like that, using reference mixes to unlock problem solving things is just like the funnest thing.
What are some other things, Doug, that you do to develop as a mixer? Because you've had like 20 plus number ones. You absolutely destroy.
That's insane, by the way.
Yeah, you're a monster at the top of the game. You know what I mean? So how do you, in your position with your level of success, like how do you continue to grow? What are additional ways?
It is hard. I want to get better so bad, but I often find myself like, I don't know how. I don't know what to do. But I think it's kind of being a student of anyone. Like, it would be super arrogant to say that I'm past all the YouTube information, but there's stuff of guys that I think like aren't that amazing at mixing. I'll still learn a little nugget of wisdom every once in a while by, watching up to the 40-minute point in an hour-long YouTube video. So it seems like, I wasted 40 minutes, but for getting one thing, picking up one tiny little trick at this stage is so valuable to me. So I would say it's not becoming jaded towards internet content. That's a big one that I always have to remember, because, I start a YouTube tutorial, YouTube thing, and it's just like my eyes rolling so hard.
Your tendency would be to have your eyes glaze over with some of that YouTube content.
But sticking around and just kind of like, I don't know, it's like going to Goodwill to try to find a good book. Like, you got to look through so much crap. Like, so many, what's that? Never mind. Like, you got to look through all the Martha Stewart cookbooks to find like something that's actually cool. So that's one way to do it. And then, it's super cliche sounding, but like having a community of peers is very important. People that push you and kind of have different perspectives on things. I remember getting together in a room with my buddies, Matt Huber and Jeff Braun, and we all sat in front of Matt's speakers and just listened to the same song. And we all had differing opinions about certain things, like certain moves that we would try, and it'd be like, oh, someone would love that, and then someone would be like, I don't, it doesn't do it for me. And I think seeing that, seeing different tastes in real life was just so interesting. And I want to be able to understand how you're hearing the music, because what I do is for other people. I don't just mix for myself. Like, no one would hire me if I just did my thing all the time. I want to be able to hear music how other people hear it, and kind of like empathize in that way, and be able to deliver the most emotionally impactful mix, you know, by understanding different people's perspective on how they hear music.
I think that's important, what you mentioned about peer groups. I mean, for example, EYAL, you may or may not know this, but I met Doug and Matt Huber and Jeff Braun over some smash burgers in Nashville, because I've known Jeff for a while. And, you know, just sitting down with these guys for 2 or 3 hours, nerding out about mixes and stuff. It's like you come home with your head just filled with cool ideas and inspiration. And, you know, so what I'm saying is that knowing people in this game, regardless of where they're at or where you're at, you know, they could be better than you, they could be below you in terms of like status and credits, or it doesn't matter. Like, you can really learn something from anybody. But what's important is to get together with people and to share ideas and to like get inspired and to talk about things that you're going through. Because I mean, where else can you do that if you're just mixing in your, let's just say, basement in Wisconsin? You know what I mean? And a total isolation versus, you know, what you're listening to. You know, you need that feedback. So, you know, definitely going out and making friends with people that do what you do, I think is really, really important.
Yeah, definitely. It pushes you.
100%. So, Doug, one thing that's interesting that I would think we could talk about a little bit is you're going through a bit of a transition right now. You had, speaking of, you called me and we were discussing hardware, and you've been transitioning. So what you're basically starting to pivot a little bit more towards the analog realm. So what brought that on? Because I went through this 2.5 years ago. So for this, this is always kind of interesting to me.
Well, just that drive to take my mixes up a notch. Like, that's always the thing. And I don't know, gear can tend to be very inconvenient now. So there's always that hesitation. But my buddy, a fantastic producer here in Nashville, Jeff Soika, shout out. He had me over to his place, and he was like freaking out about how good this sounded. He got a LA2A 1176 and a Moog into a Crane Song Interstellar, which is the A to D. And he was just like kind of A-Bing what it sounds like with and without. And it kind of blew my mind, because I don't think I've heard any plugin that could kind of do this magic top end like sheen in that exact like expensive sounding way. So I'm like, oh my gosh. And I was convinced right there. So I just ended up buying all this stuff, just pretty much the same stuff, but I added a couple of distressors and then some more EQs like the SSL E and API 560. But I'm going into it with just like kind of an insert mentality. I just want to have an amazing vocal chain that I could fall back to if I get subpar stuff. I feel like plugins can do a lot, but I feel like just from my experience with gear so far, gear can like transform things, like kicks, snares with this distressor and the 1176. The kind of transient attack does not exist in the box. And case in point, I was doing a shootout with another mixer, and I don't know if I should get into like the details, but
you don't got no names. No
yeah,
names.
Obviously no names, yeah. But even like the situational stuff might be sketchy. But anyways, I was doing a mix. Well, they got a mix. The band got a mix they didn't like, and then I got a shot to do it, and then they loved it. And it, I mean, in my opinion, it just kind of blew the other mix out of the water. But then they gave the other guy another chance, and when it came back, I heard it. I was like, oh my gosh, there's some stuff going on here that's kind of mind-blowing. And the one thing that I felt like I couldn't top was this transient attack on the snare, like that, like very juicy kind of like transient that I have no idea of all the compressor plugins how I would remotely get that sound. And I was wondering if it was something like Outboard, and I'm pretty positive it was, because it literally, I could tell the samples weren't replaced. This sound had just been completely transformed, and I was really curious about how that's possible. And I think, like, I would bet money it's the like a pair of distressors, because it just has that like juicy snap where it sounds like the snare is super loud, but it doesn't blow out like plugins. Like I have a pretty good like snappy snare chain with Spiff and JST clip, which sounds incredible to me. But there is this subtlety that I want, and I think it can come from either of these things, like 1176 or Distressor.
One thing I want to highlight that you said that I think is important is going back to the theme here we've had today about progress. Like going back 2.5 years ago when I decided to jump back into the ring and start actually mixing professionally again after taking about 18 months off from it. I was like doing my own band's song, and it's different when you do your own thing versus something professionally, because there's no deadline. It's like, you go in, you work as hard as you can within realistic terms of budget, and like you try to kill it, but then you have to hand it off, and that's the end of it. When you're doing your own band, you're like, I want this to be sick. So I switched for like 5 or 6 years to Straight in the Box, because I was working with so much with Joey, and it was just like that's what people wanted, I felt like, at the time, and I just kind of acclimated back to it. And then it was like I did my mix of this song, and I was like, oh, this is great. And I'm listening to all these modern mixes, and I felt so good about it. And then I went back and listened to some mixes that I like from earlier periods, like by people like Bergstrand and et cetera. And I was like, oh crap, what's my mix missing? Like there's something missing that I want in that sound. And that kind of led me down a rabbit hole of 3 months of sitting there testing plugins and like trying to come up with ways to create those sounds in a computer. And me and my poor assistant sat here for hours a day, just nerding to the most insane levels of insanity, trying every possible combination and chain of things, and like A-Bing. And then, I eventually got a summing mixer in here, and like I got in my car, I hit play, and I immediately, oh my God, there's the transients I've been looking for. Like, how did that just happen? And I'm like, maybe I'll just get a bus compressor. And now I have a freaking console sitting in front of me. And it took me down a long rabbit hole. But the point is like, through the whole mind is I realized that I had kind of peaked and plateaued for a couple of years. And no matter what I did or what I watched or how many people's ideas that I tried to put a spin on, I felt like limited by the format for the types of sounds I was hearing in my head and trying to achieve. And I couldn't achieve them any other way. And then once I unlocked that, it was like a whole new rediscovery and just jump up in my mixing and stuff like that. And for me, not saying it's the right thing for everybody, it's definitely not. But for me, in the way that I like to work, it made a lot of sense. But like I said, just that drive to like get better and to really push the limits and my fundamental assumptions of what I think is right or wrong, and then break most of those, was really, really exciting process to go through, and just like really led to an explosion. And, it brought in a lot of work, and I've had a lot of fun doing it. So it's exciting for me to watch you start going through a bit of this here. And I'm very curious to hear your results, because I know your mixes are phenomenal. I can't wait to hear what you do coming through some of your new toys.
Yeah. Well, I do want to be empowering to the people. I did summing for a little bit a couple of years ago, and the results I got were phenomenal. It was like so much more energy, so much more space, and all that stuff. And I was trying to find out a way to not have to print and go through the summing. So I recreated some things, and after hearing what the summing did and recreating it, I feel like I recreated it almost identically, but I never would have arrived at that sound had I not summed in the first place. So I do think that almost anything can be recreated in the box if you have, a goal to strive for. You can kind of use the plugin list that you have to recreate this. But if you don't have that reference, how would you know where this song can go? So that's the caveat there, where it's like, you can really achieve any sound, but like, how do you come up with these ideas for that sound? And it gets really, philosophical here, but
yeah, you got to hear it.
Yeah, I just want to I think of my, my mixes as art, and I want to make them more artistic and more beautiful and more like realistic and tons of finesse, that type of stuff. And I think that's what the gear is going to add to my situation. And I'm going about it in a more convenient way where I'm just, this is an odd thing about my workflow, but I work in Ableton. And in Ableton, we have these inserts that you can just literally put on the track. It sends it in and out with volumes like pre and post. And so I can instantly A/B and decide, is the
hardware inserts.
Yeah, exactly. Is this going out of the box through the 1176, the MOG, and the LA2A? Is this better or is this worse? And sometimes it's not as good. Like I put a snare through the 1176 yesterday, and I was A/Bing, and I'm like, it didn't beat what we had in the box. So it's just more tools to having complete control, and any flavor, any color that exists, I want to have it. I want to have an option so I could make, the best sounding mix that I can deliver.
That's a really important point. People don't understand this about gear. And I see this all the time when people get into hardware. They're just like, they assume like a blanket. It's like a blanket. You can just put it over everything and it's going to warm you up. Well, it might be 90 degrees outside. And the last thing you want to do is get warm. You might want to get cold. So you don't need a blanket.
Hoodie and a trench coat, bro.
Yeah. It's when it comes to equipment or plugins, everything has got a sound to it. And, I don't know why people struggle with this concept I see so often online, but everything has a sound. In the box has a sound. A plugin has a sound. A piece of gear has a sound. And your job as a mixer is learning to take sounds and put them and deploy them where they are the most effective for what you're doing. And the only way you can do that is, again, to audition. You might, like my favorite vocal compressor in history is a Chandler RS660. That thing is like, oh my God. But there are vocals I put it on. I'm like, nope, it sounds too soft. And there's vocals I put it on where I'm like, I don't know how it does what it does, but oh my God, that sounds literally 500% better. So, it's not the right thing for everything, but when it works, it works. And I'm glad I have it. So, really taking the time to learn your tools is very important, and what they sound good at and where they sound good.
So it bothers me when people argue about gear online, and especially when they've never used it. Like, there's a lot of people arguing about gear they've never used. But
they love to do that.
It's ridiculous. But arguing about gear online is ridiculous because you can't hear what somebody else is hearing, and your use of it is not going to be one-to-one with their use or their experience of it, and you're only going to learn your tools by actually using them and coming to your own conclusions. So sitting there arguing with people online about gear is a complete and utter waste of your time on earth.
But EYAL, I heard that so-and-so said this, so there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But have you ever?
About this thing I've never used or even seen in real life.
Ben Death had a great thing he said when I was sitting in a room with him. He was like, how many times I've seen people sit around and argue about which 1176 plugin sounds the best, and none of them have ever sat in a room with a real 1176 for a day, regardless, 30 or 40 years with one. So they don't even know what a real 1176 sounds like, and they're arguing which plugin sounds the most 1176. He's like, it's hilarious to me. And I'm like, it's a good point.
That is a good point.
However, if they've never used a real 1176 and have only used the plugins, then obviously arguing which plugins sound better among the plugins is much more of an honest argument than saying which one sounds the most like the real thing.
100%.
You're saying which one, if you're arguing which one sounds the most like the real thing, but you've never been in the room with the real thing, then you don't know what you're talking about. But even then, even so, asking somebody else to tell you which of these 3 1176s to get is dumb. And it's dumb because you guys don't have the same brain or the same ears. You're not going to be working on the same stuff, and you don't think the same way. And whatever reason they write down and whatever specs they cite about aliasing or whatever,
oversampling.
It doesn't fucking mean anything. It doesn't mean anything.
But oversampling, bro.
Yeah, like it doesn't mean a goddamn thing. The only thing that means anything is your experience with
that
the
EQ
tool.
cramps.
Yeah, though I do think it's good that people are enthusiastic. I just I see a lot of that as kind of procrastination. It's like veiled procrastination. It's this type of procrastination that people use to make themselves feel good about procrastinating. They feel like they're like working. They get this like rush, like they're working on the thing they care about, but they're really just talking about the thing that they're thinking that they're working on.
Yeah.
So
it's less scary than doing the actual thing.
yeah, and possibly failing at it, or possibly
totally.
So, speaking of, how long was it before you started to get results that other people started to react to in a way where they wanted to give you money?
Wait, start the question over. Sorry.
So how long after you started mixing, after you like decided I'm going to learn how to mix, until the outside world, other people reacted to it well enough to want to give you money for your mixing?
Well, I have a kind of interesting story, which probably isn't that common, but I was doing production, so I was being paid for that stuff. And I sent a mixer off to the artist's like mixer, and what I got back was offensive. I was so upset by this mix, and literally in that moment, I was like, I don't want anyone to ever feel like this. And number two, I'm a mixer now, because if that guy said he's a mixer, I've been a mixer this whole time, because my rough mix slayed whatever he did. So in that moment, I decided I'm a mixer, and I got on Sound Better. This was like, I don't know, 7-8 years ago, when I was first starting. And almost immediately, people paid me, a very meager mix rate, but like almost immediately. So I guess that's not a good answer to the question. I would say, so when I started doing music and getting paid for it, it was production. So the first time someone paid me for production was after I did one for free for another guy, made it sound really good. And then I put it on my Sound Better reel, and then people started coming in. That was it. So
pretty quick.
Yeah, crazy.
It's awesome. It sounds to me like you haven't ever had like an issue putting yourself out there.
No, but I've been through times where I don't know how to put myself out there. I think that's actually the hardest part. But I like a good example. I thought it was so genius at the time, but this was years ago, before people had, like, before great advice was so like easily available. But I played in a band, and we toured, and we would play these like summer festivals. And so I started looking at all the festivals that we've been to. I started looking at their websites and reading the rosters. And it was like, okay, I've heard of this band, I heard of that band, heard of that band, off limits. But I've never heard of these guys or those guys. They're probably in my league of people that I could convince / trick into working with me, because, they're nobodies, just like me.
Trick.
So basically, it's just a way of, you gotta go to the dance with the ugly girl to move your way up. That's
Trick them.
horrible,
23 number ones later.
Do what you got to do to get in the door. Work
ugly
with what
girl
you got.
got me into the dance, and and then you kind of work your way up, but not being afraid to start at the very bottom, and just having that drive. Like, I obviously had to have some kind of drive to work with the lowest of low artists. I'm not trying to be demeaning to people, but the first 2 productions, I picked an artist that I was like, man, he's got extreme potential. Like, he sounds great. And I just hit a bunch of people up, and I said, I will do production for free for you. And one of them got back to me. And ever since then, I've been a, mixer, producer, audio engineer.
That's kind of amazing, actually. And I just want to point out, you mentioned that good advice is readily available these days, but so is bad advice. And
True.
I have seen a lot of really successful older mixers who have been rich for like 30 or 40 years saying you should never do free work, and like this know your worth garbage. And
half of being a mixer is doing free work.
Before you have
mixes.
worth, know your worth, like worth in the marketplace. And before you've even made a name for yourself, or even before anything, never do any free work. It's like, yeah, if you have like 17 diamond records and like 45 number ones, you probably shouldn't do any free work. Fine. Yeah. But when you have literally nothing to your name, you got to do whatever it takes to get yourself out there.
100%.
So,
I'm an advocate for know your worth. You're worth nothing. So charge accordingly. That's I've given that advice to people. Like I know people who are in Nashville and they're charging, I'm not gonna throw out exact rates, but like they're charging this kind of higher tier level and they're struggling to get work. And I'm like, listen, charge half that. You'll have more work than you know what to do with. It's literally supply and demand. If they're not demanding you at this rate, like the market is telling you you're not worth that. So find your actual worth. So he cut his rate in half, and now he's got to mix like every single day.
Which will mean that at some point he'll be able to raise his rate.
Exactly. So yeah, this like kind of artificially inflating your rate to maybe look like you're more professional than you are, or to make more money. I haven't seen it work in my life. So I would give people that exact advice. When I was on Sound Better, I was doing mixes for $150 and I had more work than I knew what to do with. And they were like, I'm not a super arrogant person, but I would say that these were the best $150 mixes that have ever been done. Because that's cheap. That's dirt cheap. And I feel like they were pretty high quality back then for people's very low tier songs.
But eventually, when you're booked out with those, you can raise your rates.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, just know your worth in that moment. And then it's supply and demand. If you have too much demand, lower it down, raise your rate. And I've done probably like 7 rate raises, and each time you lose somebody. So you gotta, like, people don't say that. They say know your worth and raise your rate. It's know your worth, but it's like, honestly, what is the worth on if I do a mix at my rate for a band who gets like 37 listens on Spotify? That's not worth it at all. So like, why? It's not worth that. It's just funny when people put that blanket statement over everything. Kind of drives me nuts.
Well, when they say know your worth, they don't explain it the way you just did. It's usually just this feel good kind of statement. And it's usually intended in a way to get people to inflate their worth. Usually know your worth doesn't mean know your worth. It means inflate your worth and make yourself feel good about yourself. It doesn't, what you were saying is actually do know your worth. Honestly, if it's high, if it's low, like just be real with it, because that's the only way to move forward.
Yeah. And it really is like each rate increase that I've done, like 30% or more people fall off. And then you keep this certain tier of client. So you got to be ready. Like, don't expect everyone to like just be okay with your rate increase. They will find someone else when they're in a budget, like locked position.
So when you've raised your rate and lost those 30%, was it made up for by the rate increase?
It was like greatly surpassed by new clientele and the rate increase.
So were there clientele you were turning down previously?
Yes. Wait. At which point?
Like before you raise your rate, too booked up, have to turn people down.
Yeah. Well, it's not really a turn down thing. It's more of a like you're 4 months out, and they say,
okay, yeah,
no.
yeah. May as well be turning them down if it's 4 months out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, I don't like to.
Yeah.
If you got money, I'll do a mix for you.
No, but I mean, for them, like from the artist perspective.
Yeah, practically speaking.
Unless they're in a signed band or something, practically speaking, booking that far out is almost the same as the dude's not available.
Right. Yeah, I guess so. But yeah, it did get to that point where it was like, I'm 4 months out. I'm having to say no to I'm having to either take on stuff that's super exciting and screw everybody, which is not how I want to run my business. Or I gotta change something. And I had a manager at the time who was fantastic, who was kind of the enforcer, because I hate being the guy who's like, hey, I did a mix for you. Where's my money? Type of thing. Or no, it's going to be this price. I don't like that at all. I want to be friends with have good relationships with the people that I work with. And to me, that doesn't involve asking for money or staying firm on rates myself. Not into that. So I had a manager help me get to the rate that I'm at now.
That's what they're good for.
Yep.
Yeah. Let them be the pit bull. Joel, you look like you're about to say something.
I was going to say, do you guys want to do some rapid fire?
Yep, let's do it. Yeah, right, we're almost out of time here. So
I'm going to shoot off some questions and just the first thing that comes to your mind and why, and we're going to rip through them. So first one, what is a trend in mixing right now that you think people are doing too much of?
Templates.
Okay. If you could give one mixing tip to a beginner to improve in terms of what to focus on, what would you say?
Get a pair of crappy monitors.
Okay.
As opposed to what?
Add a pair of crappy monitors to your mixing setup.
Okay.
Gotcha. What is one thing in your approach to mixing that's different now that you've had massive charting success versus when you started, in terms of what you focus on or maybe specific techniques or?
Depressing answer. Not losing it.
Not losing your mind?
No, not losing the level of success that I've experienced over the past 4 years. I'm obsessed with not losing it. So I treat every mix this is the most important mix I've ever done, which is stressful.
I love that. Okay. If you had to pick a vocal chain, what's the sauce?
Oh, this nitty gritty. I'll play it real. Right now it's when it's not out of the box, it's T-Rex multiband limiter, UAD Blue Stripe 1176, and then Fringe Alert CLA vocals on wall mode and de-esser. Works every time. Unless you got a ballady uncompressed song. But
and the final question, what mix inspires you the most right now? Literally breaks everyone's brain every time I ask something like this.
It's just an old reference that I think is really cool. I love this mix of Claire Rosencrans, Frankenstein. I think it's just such a jam. It's dark, but it's very saturated and thick and spatially width. I love that, and the low end just it's so squishy and feels amazing.
Awesome.
Oh, scratch that. A record from when I was, I don't know, 12 or 13. AFI Sing the Sorrow. I'm so into those warm, woolly, fat guitars and the kind of the explosive drum sound. It's a weird thing to like, but I love it right now.
Amazing.
So, well, Doug, thank you very much for coming on. It's been a pleasure meeting you. And
likewise.
Yeah, it's been great talking to you.
Yeah, same.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Doug.
Yeah,
Thank you,
thank
sir.
you guys.